Good morning. This is Campbell McCrary. I'm a Vice President of Capital Markets at Amvest Capital in New York. Welcome to the Amvest Capital Inc. live webinar with the World Gold Council and representatives from Golden Star Resources and Newmont Court. We're going to discuss ESG and gold. We hope you'll enjoy today's program. It will also be available in replay mode. Feel free to chat in your questions in the question pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll ask the questions in real time. Amvest is a New York-based specialist investment management and corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resource sector. You can follow us on LinkedIn as Amvest Capital. You can check out our other metals and mining-oriented programming at amvestcapital.com/webinars. Important disclaimer, this call is most certainly for informational purposes only. Very pleased to have with us today three speakers. Terry Heymann, the CFO of the World Gold Council, Philipa Varris, Executive Vice President and Head of Sustainability at Golden Star Resources, and Claire Larner, External Relations of Newmont. Heading up the Q&A is Gabriel Alonso-Mendoza, Managing Partner here at Amvest Capital in New York. Terry, if you want to boot up your webcam, we'll dive in.
Excellent. Hi everybody. Excellent. Terry Heymann here, speaking to you from London. Campbell, thank you very much, and my thanks to everybody at Amvest for giving us this opportunity today. So let me talk a little bit about gold and ESG. A lot of interest in ESG, a lot of interest in gold. In fact, you could almost make quite a strong case, I think, that the two biggest themes in 2020 from an investment perspective were ESG and gold. So a natural opportunity to talk about both of those two and how they come together and the linkages. So if we can just move on to the next page. What I'd like to do is briefly introduce the World Gold Council and then talk about three areas that really speak to gold and ESG. Climate change, big issue, obviously for the investment community and indeed for everybody else. Critical that collectively we take action. Responsible gold mining principles, a work program led by members of the World Gold Council to really clearly set out what constitutes responsible gold mining, and then some really important work on the role that gold mining can play in supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll speak to some research that we at the World Gold Council put out on that last year. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the World Gold Council. We've been around over 30 years, and we're here to support the gold market. We are membership backed. Our members are leading gold mining companies. And we really focus on helping ensure that this market operates well, that the market infrastructure supports effective operation, that there is good understanding of what's going on in the gold market. And we put a lot of research and data out as to what's going on. And anybody that's interested, please do go and look at goldhub.com. And there's a ton of research and data really about the specifics of the gold market. And then increasingly, we've been looking at this whole area on ESG and what role gold plays in today's world and how the actors in the gold industry are taking their responsibilities seriously in regards to high levels of ESG performance. So let's move on to the next slide. Our members, just to touch on them, really important are the organizations that really set the agenda for everything we do as an organization. And everything I'm going to be talking about in terms of the ESG performance comes from our board that comprises generally the CEOs of our member companies. And it really is a commitment from these companies collectively that the gold industry as a group is committed to supporting high levels of ESG performance, is committed to implementing the responsible gold mining principles, recognizes that the mining industry, the gold mining industry, has an important role to play, of course, in operating responsibly, but also in contributing to sustainable socio and economic development. Next slide. So let me just give a little bit of an overview about how we think about gold as it sits potentially to an investor thinking about gold and ESG. And four main points here. The first is gold can actually be, we believe, a climate risk mitigating asset. If you think about the role that gold has historically played, it's proven as a risk mitigating asset. As investors increasingly incorporate a climate lens, we believe, and we've got initial evidence to demonstrate, that gold is likely to perform other mainstream asset classes under various long-term climate scenarios. I'll speak to that in a moment. That actually gold and holding gold can reduce your carbon footprint over time. Again, we can talk about the mining side, but when you think about holding gold in a portfolio, very, very low incremental emissions associated with that. That investors and others in the gold industry can have confidence that gold is being produced responsibly, that there are mechanisms in place to validate responsible gold production, the responsible gold mining principles that I'll talk to, but also further downstream what's happening at the refiner level in terms of actually making the bars from the doré that comes in from the gold mines. And then this really important point about this is an industry that serves society. This is an industry that makes a really meaningful difference in terms of people's lives, and in particular, looking at this framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, and mapping how the gold sector and gold mining in particular really contribute meaningfully. And again, we've got research on that and can direct everybody to more in depth on those areas. But those are the topics I want to cover today. I am going to go through very briefly, I'm afraid, these different topics because of the time that we've got, but very happy to get into any of these in more detail during the call, during the Q&A section. Next slide. So firstly, just to touch on a little bit more what I said before, that as investors increasingly incorporate a climate lens into thinking about their portfolio construction, we believe there's an important role for gold to play. That when you do some analysis looking at the sensitivity, forecast sensitivity, and obviously forward looking, of how different asset classes are going to operate under different climate scenarios, we believe there's a very compelling case that gold is likely to perform better and actually further increases the role that gold can play as a portfolio, a critical underpinning to portfolios to support in uncertain times. Gold is well understood for playing that role. As we think about climate and we're looking at different scenarios here, and of course, we all hope that we keep well below 2 degrees that was set out in Paris, but gold, this is just another reason for holding gold and the role that gold can play to actually strengthen portfolios from an ESG perspective. Next slide. And when you think about where the emissions occur, there's no question gold mining does produce a significant amount of emissions. But what we're seeing is that there's significant movement on the road towards decarbonisation. And I'm sure we'll hear about that more from some of the other speakers. And actually, when you speak to experts in the climate lens, it's that ability to decarbonize that is really the area that investors should be paying attention to. If investors and capital markets want to support climate change action, the ability to look at opportunities to invest in important industries that are decarbonizing and are finding ways to reduce their emissions is actually a really influential way to get engaged and involved. And so put up here some examples. The first all-electric mine is a gold mine. It's Newmont's Borden mine in Northern Ontario. The use of solar panels, I think it's a great example. Gold mines tend to be in remote locations, and one of the advantages of being in a remote location is there tends to be more space. And so installation of these huge solar arrays, some of the largest in West Africa, attached to Iron Gold's mine, use of hydro, and obviously energy efficiency. Again, lots more examples in some of our research, but this is a really important topic and there's a lot going on around decarbonizing. Next slide, please. Which brings me to a bit more broadly speak about ESG at large. And climate, important as it is only one element of responsible gold mining. And actually, in response to questions from investors and other stakeholders as to what actually constitutes responsible gold mining, we put out at the end of 2019 this set of responsible gold mining principles that really tries to define very broadly all of the different material elements that should be considered when anybody is thinking about gold mining and what constitutes responsible gold mining. This was an initiative that was very much initiated by our board, the CEOs of our member companies, who recognized the importance of the gold mining industry helping investors, consumers, participants in the supply chain have confidence that this gold is ethically sourced. And we went through a very extensive 2-year consultation process, getting input from a lot of different stakeholders to make sure that the principles that we ended up with really do reflect expectations, societal expectations of what a responsible gold miner should be doing. All of our members have committed to implement these principles, and we set out a 3-year timeline to full implementation, recognizing that we've set the bar high and that this is quite a demanding standard. If we go on to the next slide. Don't have time to get into all the detail here. There are actually 51 individual sub-principles that are set out, and I encourage anybody that's interested to go into our website and take a look at this. But we've grouped these under each of the E, S, and G. And across this, we think we've picked out those areas that are really important. People often ask me which is the most important, and the honest answer is it depends on the circumstances of where you are operating and the challenges and the risks that you are managing. But you can see here there's really a strong commitment to ethical conduct, to operating in the right way, obviously to social aspects that have been really brought into focus over the last year, I think. Even more so than previously, with recognizing and understanding through managing in the pandemic how we protect society, and of course environmental management, in addition to climate and managing climate, also thinking around biodiversity and obviously environmental stewardship. Again, I'm happy to take questions on this, but I hope it just gives you a sense of the breadth of coverage in these responsible gold mining principles. And if we go on to the next slide, please. And a question I always get asked is, well, that's all well and good. The World Gold Council is an industry body. Nice that your members have committed to implementing, but how do we have confidence that it really is happening? And so what we have set out alongside the principles themselves is very clear requirements that implementing companies need to get external assurance. And we've actually developed, to go alongside the responsible gold mining principles, the process and the assurance guidance so that the assurance community can go in, assess, monitor, validate a company's commitment and performance against the responsible gold mining principles in very much a similar way to what we're all used to with financial reporting. And this whole domain of non-financial reporting and external assurance on that is one that's only going to grow in rigor and importance, and is something that I know all investors are increasingly paying attention to. And we think the gold industry has made that very clear as to what it is committed to doing. But as always, we welcome feedback as to whether this works and whether this actually does allow investors to go and understand where and how that gold is being produced in conformance with these responsible gold mining principles. And just going back to where I started, we have a strong belief that responsibly undertaken, gold mining and indeed the entire gold sector really can support sustainable social and economic development. So if we go on to the next slide, which is really my final slide, just wanted to talk a little bit about the United Nations SDGs, the 17 targets that have been identified and developed through the United Nations process, and that it is incumbent on countries, on companies, on communities to progress. And actually, there are so many examples of how the gold mining sector, again, when it's undertaken responsibly, supports the communities where they're operating through things that you would sort of imagine, like employment, but also through developing infrastructure, through providing healthcare and maintaining community health, particularly important over the last year, through actually helping to improve the environment, potentially through improving quality of access to water, and obviously through tax payments. And in many countries, gold mining companies are very significant contributors to the national exchequer, reflecting the importance of gold mining in those economies. Again, we have put a lot of work into setting out the role that gold mining plays in contributing to the SDGs. I've got an extensive report up on our website and lots of examples there as well, and would encourage everybody to take a look if you want to learn more. So with that, I'm going to pause. Thank you for the time and happy to take questions later on.
Philipa, you're up.
Hi,
Philipa.
how are you?
Excellent. Okay, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Okay, thank you very much firstly to the Amvest Capital team and also to the World Gold Council for this opportunity. Gabe, next slide, please. Okay, next. Golden Star is a Canadian company with its corporate office in London. We're a mid-tier gold producer with one operating asset in Ghana, West Africa. In 2020, we achieved a major transformation that now sees us poised to realise our strategic objectives for growth, including growth of our world-class Wassa mine. Underpinning our activities is our sustainability mission and its concurrent themes of governance and risk management and creation of lasting value. Next slide, please. Golden Star started life as a junior explorer and 2 decades ago acquired its first operating entity. Although well-intentioned, the company lacked operating experience, and in its naivete, execution sometimes fell short. In credit to the team at the time, lessons were learnt. The company then spent the better half of the next decade improving and undertaking programs to re-earn trust. The modern-day Golden Star is stronger for these lessons. The design and implementation of our programs have real depth, described by one international NGO as sophisticated, and reflecting our deeper understanding of the drivers of social license. We now have an integrated sustainability focus, evident from our vision through to our plans, and our resulting performance reflects the success of this approach, with strong conformance, incident avoidance, and numerous recognition within Ghana and internationally. Next slide, please, Gabe. I have 3 case studies to highlight our integrated sustainability approach and its resultant benefits. 2 of these case studies highlight infrastructure constructed last year that will be commissioned in the first quarter of this year. The first of these is the Wassa paste fill plant. The paste plant will enable the company to maximise ore body recovery and simultaneously reduce risk. During paste production cycles, 1/4 to 3/4 of the tailings stream will be diverted to paste production, reducing volumes stored in the tailings storage facility. The tailings will be chemically stabilised, providing enhanced geotechnical conditions and mine safety. The company will not only benefit from reduced risk, but will also reduce electricity consumption over conventional backfill, reduce TSF capital, and a reduction in operating footprint. Not only is this the first plant of its type in Ghana, but it also represents international best practice, featuring state-of-the-art design and technology innovations. This sets the stage for Wassa's future and is consistent with the responsible gold mining principles, illustrating that environmental responsibility is at the core of how we work. Thanks. For the next slide, please. Energy supply security is fundamental to integrated sustainability. In partnership with Genser Energy, the new Wassa natural gas power station will provide the potential to flatten our load profile and feed excess generation back to the grid. This enhancement also frees up government grid supply, and in a context of rising demand in Ghana, inadequate available transfer capacity in major load centres, and projected peak demands that are close to the dependable generation capacity, this is important for the country as well. With the foundation for our energy transformation nearing completion, we have also recently installed Africa's longest single-point suspension cable, using a method of cable lowering not previously undertaken in Africa. Installed entirely by our Ghanaian team, with international support provided by video link only because of COVID, this high voltage cable is the backbone of our underground mine extension plans. The cable was lowered from the surface via a 450-metre deep borehole, with the installation dramatically reducing required cable length, and will ultimately result in reduced line losses for reduced energy consumption. These activities demonstrate our alignment with the RGMPs towards energy efficiency and combating climate change. Next slide, please. The Golden Star Oil Palm Plantation is our flagship sustainability initiative. GSOP has established over 1,500 hectares of plantation with no deforestation and provides employment for 700 people in sustainable agribusiness, a third of whom are women. GSOP, like all of our sustainability initiatives, is not about philanthropy. It realises genuine sustainable value for host communities and for Golden Star. GSOP plantations provide high-value employment, which reduces the uptake of illegal activities, including illegal mining. The plantations also act as valuable buffers, limiting encroachment on our activities. And in industry-leading practice, we have now successfully operated plantations on former tailings storage facilities, demonstrating self-funding mine site reclamation and successful high-value post-mining land use, a target achieved by very few. The GSOP case study provides a real-life example that is aligned with the RGMP's intention for working with communities, contributing to their socio-economic advancement, and in parallel, addressing environmental stewardship towards mine closure. Next slide, please. These initiatives are just a few examples of our integrated approach to sustainability, and I look forward to the Q&A session for more discussion on the subject of gold and ESG, but specifically how the adoption of the RGMPs will guide our further evolution in making a meaningful contribution to our stakeholders and to society as embodied by the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Philipa, and thank you so much to Amvest and the World Gold Council for including Newmont in this panel. I see that we have 173 attendees at the moment, which is amazing, really speaks to the energy behind some of these ESG issues. So thank you again for including us. Next slide, please. Thanks, Gabe. And next slide, please. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about Newmont for those of you that don't know us, particularly our ESG focus and how this sits alongside strong financial performance. And then I'm going to pick up on two topics that Terry raised, specifically what we're doing around climate resiliency and some of our work on the Sustainable Development Goals. So briefly, for those of you that don't know Newmont, we are the world's leading gold mining company and producer of copper, silver, zinc, and lead. We have assets in North America, South America, Australia, and Africa. And when we think of the term ESG, it's a relatively new term. It started being used in the last couple of years, but the issues themselves around social and environmental performance are not new. Newmont is 100 years old, so we have some experience with these issues. And I think, like Philipa mentioned, we have learned some hard lessons around what robust community relationships need to look like, what strong environmental performance needs to look like, and crucially, what good governance needs to underpin social and environmental performance. So we've embedded the learnings from those lessons into our current culture, into our systems, and into our processes. And I think that that's led to us being recognized as an ESG leader in this space. And just some examples of those recognitions recently, we have been voted the second most transparent company in the S&P 500. We were recently voted number 13 on the list of 100 best corporate citizens. And we have been the #1 gold mining company on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for the last 6 years. And as I said, this performance complements our exceptional financial performance, which provides industry-leading returns to shareholders. Next slide, please. I just wanted to briefly show you our strategy map, not to go through the details, but really just to show the importance that we give to ESG performance that sits alongside some of the other aspects of performance in the company. So you can see there our purpose, which is to create value and improve lives through sustainable and responsible mining. ESG is obviously a critical part of delivering on that purpose. And you'll see here some of those ESG objectives, such as meeting climate targets, which I'll go into shortly, improving site level performance, and ensuring that host communities recover and thrive post-COVID. Those objectives sit alongside targets around production and expansion. So really a crucial part of our strategy is delivering strong ESG performance. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of some of the public targets that we've set for ourselves to drive performance improvements. Again, won't go through all these in detail, but I really did want to highlight the governance aspect of ESG. All elements are obviously important, but governance is essential. Without it, we cannot deliver on strong environmental and social performance. So in this regard, we've had an independent, a non-executive chair and independent board for 15 years, with a robust audit committee, a safety and sustainability committee, and a leadership development and compensation committee. And it's this leadership and development committee that holds management to account for succession plans. So really makes sure that leaders are only promoted in Newmont on the basis of strong ESG performance. And that's really critical for driving a corporate culture that places a heavy emphasis on ESG performance. The Safety and Sustainability Committee of the board reviews progress against targets quarterly, including those you can see here. And then finally, we know that the board must embody the values of the company. So for Newmont, inclusion and diversity, including gender equality, is a key priority for us. And the board has embodied this value by appointing another female to the board last year. So we've now reached gender parity with 5 women and 5 men on our non-executive board, which is a pretty progressive step for an American company. Next slide, please. So I briefly wanted to pick up on the issue of climate, which, as we know, is an absolutely critical issue for the industry and for the world. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing around climate resiliency. And we have announced targets of a 30% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030, with an ultimate goal of having net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This new 2030 target builds on earlier targets that we had to reduce emissions by 16.5% over 5 years, and those targets ended last year. We are working with the Science Based Targets Initiative, which is an initiative that mobilizes private sector to take urgent action on climate change. And we're working with them to develop criteria which helps us identify emission reduction pathways to meet the Paris Agreement goal of being well below the 2 degrees global temperature change. We'll be using the SBTI criteria for our targets for this year to 2030, as well as when engaging our partners and joint ventures to make sure that their operations align with our targets. Next slide, please. So many of you will be familiar with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This year, we will be publishing our first climate strategy report aligned to the TCFD. This will cover our governance, our strategy, and our portfolio resilience to certain climate scenarios, as well as tracking our progress towards goals. So in order to achieve those very progressive targets and goals, we will be investing $500 million over the next 5 years in climate initiatives. We will also be implementing a new energy and climate investment standard, which will inform our capital investment process to ensure that those 2030 reduction targets are embedded into investment decisions, particularly for projects like fleet vehicles, production equipment, on-site renewable power generation, and energy efficiency. And then you can see some of the other initiatives on this slide, like investments in solar and wind projects. Next slide, please. Finally, and just very briefly, I wanted to talk a little bit about Newmont's work on the Sustainable Development Goals. So for Newmont, ensuring that we positively contribute to the SDGs has meant ensuring that we prioritize those SDGs where we think we can have the most impact, but crucially are most aligned to our business strategy. So when we did an initial mapping exercise in 2016, we realized that there were very few SDGs that we couldn't contribute to. But to ensure that our efforts are more than short-term philanthropic endeavors and really benefit the communities where we operate in the longer term, we had to focus on priority goals aligned to our strategy. So in that regard, we have prioritized good health and well-being, gender equality, water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, and then crucially, partnerships. We know it's beyond the capabilities of an individual actor to deliver on the SDGs. So that partnership piece is crucial. And again, this is something the World Gold Council report highlighted as they have a foundational chapter on partnership. We have numerous examples of our contribution to these SDGs, ranging from reducing infant mortality rates in Ghana to increasing water access for more than 200,000 people in Cajamarca around our mine in Peru. Our global inclusion and diversity work is an important contribution to SDG 5. And we contribute to decent work and economic growth, not just through direct job creation, but also induced employment in the wider economy. We have these and many more examples in our sustainability report, Beyond the Mine, which is available on our website. I will stop there and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If you can all panelists just turn your cameras back on and we'll get into the Q&A. We have a little less than half an hour, which is a good amount of time to go through. And I'll just ask the attendees to look at the question pane at the GoToWebinar control panel. It should be on the top right of your screen. You can answer or you can ask a question through that. And we'll also be queuing you for feedback at the end of the program. So if your question does not get answered, please include it in that feedback portion and we'll do our best to get it answered in a timely manner. So first question is for Terry. Will the World Gold Council recognize the achievement of that your members make in the Certification System Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA? That recognition helps reduce the audit burden while also providing the added trust assurance that civil society seeks. Thank you for your thoughts on this.
Sure. And look, I think it's great that there are a number of initiatives focused on responsible mining, and that reflects where the world is in terms of commitment to responsible mining and responsible mining standards. One of the things that we are keen to see is convergence across these different mining standards. That would be helpful for investors and other stakeholders. It will also be helpful for implementing companies. And so in that spirit, we actually have been working for a long time with a number of other associations in setting out equivalency frameworks and explaining where the similarities are and where the differences are between some of these different mining approaches. And let me give you some examples. Our focus is very much on gold. A lot of the issues around gold are similar in other types of mining, but there are some gold topics that are more acute. For example, the use of cyanide and responsible management of cyanide is much more associated with gold mining than almost any other type of mining, because cyanide is often used in the gold processing process. So that equivalency and understanding what these different standards are doing and how they link in with each other. The first set of equivalency frameworks were released actually by the ICMM, the International Council of Mining and Metals, at the end of last year. And that included an assessment with the responsible gold mining principles and a number of other standards. Work continues on that. IRMA certainly are an organization that have been advancing what an understanding of responsible mining is, and is an organization we speak with. And we'd like to see over time ever greater convergence so that everybody really does understand what responsible mining is. There are and there will be differences, be it commodity or be it sometimes regional. But that's, I think it's great that there's so much effort and focus on setting out what responsible mining is. We've just got to make sure that it works for the mining companies as well, that they're very willing to hold themselves to account, but what they can't do is be audited on lots of different frameworks and lots of different approaches and spend all of their time actually managing the assurance process rather than delivering value to the communities, to their shareholders, to employees. And so there's a balance there. So in short, lots of work ongoing. Great that there are these different responsible mining approaches, but we've got to find the right way to get these implemented for gold producing companies.
Thank you. And are you, or is the World Gold Council rather, recommending that a percentage of gold OPEX costs be allocated to sustainable development activities?
No, for a few reasons. Firstly, I mean, I don't think it's our place to sort of set out targets like that in terms of this is how much should be allocated. That very much depends on different operating circumstances. And then also companies account for this in different ways. I mean, we heard from both Philipa and Claire how this isn't philanthropy, their initiatives. This is built into long-term operations and sustainability of their operations. And so this to me isn't, if you like, an additional cost that we need to bear on top of what we're doing. It's integrated in the business of running a gold mine. So in short, no, I don't see a stage where we would ever put out a target, and I'm not sure that's the way that many gold producers think about it either.
Thank you, Terry. Claire, what are the lessons learned in terms of ESG from your proposed Conga operation in Cajamarca in Peru? Oh, you're on mute, Claire.
Obviously. Thank you. It's a good question. And I mentioned our 100-year history. About 30 years ago, we left the US and went into Peru, Indonesia, and Uzbekistan. And I mentioned that we did learn some very hard lessons at the time. In Peru specifically, we have an ongoing, very complex land dispute case. And it's received a lot of international attention. There are I suppose, a lot of different versions of a series of events there. And what we did in that instance, because the issues were so complex, is we convened an independent panel to conduct an independent fact-finding mission there. And so Resolve, which is an independent NGO, has published a fact-finding report that's available on their website and our website. So we're very transparent there about the events leading up to certain allegations, and that report goes into some of the detail of the different versions of those events. I will say that we are strongly committed to dialogue to resolve the issue there, and we remain so. We've also had a number of challenges over the years around Cajamarca with water issues, and I think some of the work that I mentioned around working through one of our foundations, ALAC there, and working with local government ministries to increase water access to over 200,000 people now has gone a long way into jointly working through some of those challenges and improving the lives for many, many people there.
Thank you, Claire. Philipa, can you just speak briefly and highlight, having started as an exploration company, the evolution of your approach to ESG from the early stages to where you are now?
Thanks, Gabe. Well, I think with the slide that I showed there, you can see a little bit more of the potted history of the company. But to be frank, we had great intentions when it came to implementing programs on the ground. In our very early stages, we lacked the specialist resources that we needed within the team to understand the right way to go about these approaches. And as I mentioned, we spent almost a decade recovering from that kind of early operator mistake. And during that decade, we brought in specialist expertise, we brought in community affairs experts, we brought in environmental specialists, and those people guided us as to the right approaches to engage with the local host community. And I think this speaks to Claire's earlier point that, you know, each and every community has their own needs, and being able to have someone independent to guide you through that process can be very important to being successful. For ourselves, one of the key processes that we went through to rebuild trust with the host communities was a mediation process, which had an independent mediator who helped all of the parties to talk about the history, but then to set the history aside and to create the new platform, the basis on which our relationship would be developed moving forward. And that work really was very important in educating us as to how to do things moving forward.
Thank you. Terry, how do you explain, or how does one explain successfully gold's use case to a younger ESG focused audience in a way that's meaningful to them?
Look, I think I don't think it's just a younger audience. I think it's a broad audience of people who are quite rightly questioning what role different aspects of our current world play in helping serve society's needs. And so that applies to gold as much as it does probably many other assets and goods that we're all familiar with. What I would say is, when you think about both gold mining and gold, they really do contribute very meaningfully to improving people's lives. And we've heard experiences and some of the change, positive change that gold mining has brought on the ground to local communities from both Philipa and Claire. I also think there's a really powerful role that gold can play. Let me give you an example. I was at a conference in those days when we could actually get together and speak in person. I was at a conference, I guess it was in 2019, in The Hague in the Netherlands, and was speaking about gold and climate. And I finished my talk and got off the stage, and the next speaker came up, and he was an economist, and he got up and he said, look, I'm nothing to do with the gold industry. I've never met anybody from the World Gold Council in my life. I look at economies, and I look at what builds resilience in economies. And he started talking about what happened in Aceh in Indonesia. And I'm sure many people will recall Aceh was the epicenter really of the Boxing Day tsunami back in 2011. And he said when the sirens went, what happened is it's a culture where gold is important, and that people went and they grabbed their gold and essentially they ran for the hills. And the village was completely, the town even, not a village, the town was completely flattened. And he showed this photo, nothing there. And then he showed a photo 5 years later and everything was rebuilt. And his words, and he said this came about because people had a source of capital, and the gold is important for providing financial security and financial resilience. And for so many people in the world today, gold still plays that really important role. And yes, perhaps for many of us in the West, we're fortunate that we've got many ways to help have access to financial markets and financial security, but gold still plays an important role. And particularly in Asian cultures, understanding that ability of gold to provide security and resilience is really important. And I think perhaps there's not enough of an understanding of that, and something we can do better of in explaining. But gold, both as a product, as a metal, but also the impacts of gold mining really does play a positive role. Of course, it has to be done responsibly, and that's really what we're talking about on a lot of this call.
Great. And just if we can just briefly start with Philipa, then go to Claire. just maybe speak to briefly the biggest challenges you face in implementing the RGMPs.
Thanks, Gabe. Well, for Golden Star, the implementation of the RGMPs has a natural synergy with the strategic endeavours of our company. Our sustainability strategic themes, which I outlined earlier, risk management and creation of lasting value, are absolutely aligned with the intent of the RGMPs. So the challenges that I expect will be in taking our stakeholders with us on that journey and ensuring that we move at a speed that they can sustain. And I think perhaps an example, if we think about the sub-principles around due diligence in the supply chain, this kind of naturally complements the work we're doing with local procurement. But we have to do this at a pace that's palatable to our host communities if we want to achieve our targets. We need to be able to bring our host communities with us on that journey so that we can also ensure our parallel goals around the RGMPs for creating local benefits and retaining value. If you look at our host communities, you know, people have to be out working to sustain a living. They don't have the time to drop everything and come and necessarily consult with us. So being able to implement these programs at a pace that suits those communities is very important. And but at the same time, the challenge, being able to achieve what we also would like to achieve within the timeframes that we've set for ourselves.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe.
Claire, what's your view?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. And I think actually Terry touched on a lot of these challenges when he was responding to the question about IRMA. And one of the biggest challenges is that there are so many reporting and assurance frameworks out there at the moment. We did a gap assessment a couple years ago about around 5 of them. And there are even more that we don't subscribe to. So I think just the number of requirements is intimidating, and they cover similar but not identical topics. So when we're thinking about putting a reporting and assurance protocol together, it's not just as simple as asking one question that would cover off on a number of frameworks, because they are all slightly nuanced. So the work that Terry flagged on equivalency is very, very important for us, so that when we are going through an assurance process, we are not burdening sites with 1,000 questions on the same type of performance expectations. Having said all of that, the World Gold Council responsible principles and ICMM's performance expectations do push those transparency requirements and those disclosure around performance expectations down to the site level. And that is a very welcome development. Previously, we, as we currently do, report on an aggregate global level. So we're reporting on our performance in an aggregated way. I think that level of transparency about site level performance is really welcomed by a lot of our key stakeholders. The challenge is not overburdening very busy people at the site level with reporting requirements. I think in the World Gold Council's case and in the ICMM's case, you can really see how those reporting requirements will drive performance improvements. And that is key, because that ensures we're not just reporting for reporting's sake, but we're actually using reporting to drive performance improvements. So the frameworks that do that, I think, will ultimately be the ones that get the most uptake from companies and are the most successful.
Thank you, Claire. Terry, from the World Gold Council's point of view, who polices these ESG initiatives?
It's a good question, and I think there are different approaches and probably different viewpoints. Our philosophy is that just like investors hold issuers to account on their financial reports and they rely on external assurance to do so, the same model should apply to disclosure around ESG performance. And so the model that we put out, and indeed the model that the ICMM also has, is whilst we've developed the standard, and we believe it's a very robust, credible, externally influenced standard, the actual assurance is undertaken by external third parties, and investors, communities, other people that are interested in understanding whether a company is conforming with the RGMPs shouldn't look to the World Gold Council to be the police, but should look to that validation that comes with that third-party external assurance.
And maybe, Gabe, if I could just come in on that point, and I suppose just maybe a bit about reporting more broadly and how stakeholders use our sustainability report. We have calls with investors where they are drilling down to the detail we have put in data tables around training. So I think the disclosures start a conversation. So we've had some very, very detailed questions from investors on who of our suppliers we train on human rights issues, how we determine high-risk suppliers, you know, really drilling into the detail. And I think that reflects the maturity of the ESG conversation, particularly for investors. So I think it's up to external stakeholders to hold companies to account and to really scrutinize, you know, what we're saying, because that's you know where accountability will lie.
Sorry, thank you. Terry, is there an absence of participation of South African gold mining companies in the ESG program?
No, not at all. We have a number of South African members, and there's been very strong commitment and support from companies operating in South Africa and indeed across the African continent, and we've had some experiences of that today. The responsible gold mining principles are designed to work globally and be implemented globally, and indeed one of the things that I know our members are committed to is applying same standards across all of their operations wherever they are in the world, and we've seen that. Yeah, so no, don't think so.
In terms of the premiums potentially placed on materials mined in an ESG-friendly manner, can you comment, assuming there's an audited life cycle, what your views on that concept are?
So let me start. Look, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how this market evolves. As much as the gold price is really well known and understood, in many ways it is the ultimate price benchmark that people across the world know, there are already premiums and discounts in the gold market in different locations, different geographies, different types of bar format. So premiums or discounts already exist. And I don't think we're going to see a completely sort of huge change in the way that the market operates. What I do think we will see is responsible actors in the gold supply chain wanting to work with other responsible actors. I mean, I think that's the case already, and I think that's only going to be strengthened. And so what that will do is it will give comfort and confidence to investors, to customers, that as long as they work with this group of companies that are committed to responsible mining, committed to responsible refining, committed to responsible retail and the retail investment products, then that's an ecosystem that people will want to be a part of. And so I think there will probably be some distinction between different ecosystems and where gold flows, but I don't think there's going to be per se a noticeable discount or premium. But what do I know? This is kind of looking to the future and seeing how that unfolds. The other thing I would say to that question is gold is really the ultimate recyclable material, and so much gold comes back into circulation every year that nobody ever knowingly throws gold away, and every time people have gold and they hold on to it, and at some point in its lifespan it can be infinitely remelted and reworked. So that creates a different dynamic and a different structure of a supply chain to more linear supply chains that we're used to in terms of agriculture and food and even apparel and clothing. And so that also just influences the way this market works, that every year, of course, there's new gold being mined, but in terms of existing stocks of gold, the new gold is a few percent compared to the existing stocks of gold. So the dynamics are very different from other markets where you might see a larger premium based on a particular claim. But it'll be interesting to see how it develops.
For sure. And we're just reaching the top of the hour, and we've been talking about this for the entire hour here, but maybe just a nice closer and a summary. If each one of you, starting with Terry, could just talk about gold as an investment from an ESG context, and what set of circumstances related to ESG do you feel would gather or gain more interest into gold?
So I think gold is going to get interest as what role it can play as a climate risk mitigating asset, as I talked about. I also think the more there is understanding of the steps and the proactivity that the gold industry takes to manage ESG risks, and indeed to play a positive role, there will be more people who go, yeah, you know what, I think of gold and ESG and recognize that ESG absolutely is if you like, an ESG asset. One of the challenges I always put out to investors is everybody needs to think for themselves as to what constitutes an ESG asset, and it's not just because it's got a label on it that says this is produced in this is an ESG mutual fund or whatever, that those are the only places to look for ESG assets. Gold has an important role to play in today's society. We haven't even touched on gold's role in technology and the role gold plays in healthcare applications, and including actually in some of the COVID tests that are coming out now have nanoparticles of gold. So in so many ways, gold plays an important part in today's world. It's responsibly produced. It is a well-recognized risk mitigating asset. I think it should be in everybody's portfolio. And I think that the fact that it has these strong ESG credentials just reinforces that role that it should play in everybody's portfolio.
Thank you, Terry. Philip, would you comment next, please?
Oh, sorry, that's to me. Yeah, thanks, Dave. I mean, I think gold has in the past and will continue to be a great source of contribution to sustainable local economic development. So I mentioned earlier about there's obviously direct contributions that gold mining brings in terms of the taxes and royalties paid at the national level, but there's also those more local contributions in terms of direct job creation and induced employment in the wider economy. So we publish economic impact studies, for example, and we know that multiplier effect can be between 5 and 30, depending on the country, for induced employment. So that piece is absolutely critical to some of these local economies, and will continue to be important in the future, as well as sort of addressing some of those vulnerabilities that we've seen in light of COVID-19. I think there's a crucial role for gold mining companies there to build economic resilience. And in fact, we have a global COVID community support fund, which focuses on health, food security, and economic resilience. And that third pillar is going to be essential for supporting communities post-COVID. And I think that the sector as a whole has a role to play there.
Thank you.
Look, I mean, how do I follow my two predecessors and how they've summed that up? But I don't think there's any question of the value that gold brings to all of its stakeholders and shareholders. And, you know, if we had a lot more time, we could continue to talk about the value that it brings to global society, our contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, and where the industry is now going through the World Gold Council to provide greater transparency and assurance is only going to bring that message to a broader audience.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel, World Gold Council, Newmont, Golden Star Resources, and everyone that joined today live and that will be tuning in for the replay. We will cue you for some feedback. We'd appreciate any feedback you have. And of course, if your questions weren't answered, please address them there as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.